Good morning, everyone. I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome all of you to a media event that's hosted by the Toronto NDP caucus of the Ontario NDP, the official opposition at Queen's Park. We are joined by a number of esteemed speakers who have a very important message to share with all of those in attendance, and for those who are watching on any of the social media channels, this event is being live streamed. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the City of Toronto, I believe that we're all gathered here in the city, is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. Toronto remains home to many diverse First Nations people, Métis people, and the city would like to also acknowledge, and the province would as well, and all of us on the call, to acknowledge that Toronto remains covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Williams Treaties, and it has been signed by multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Again, my name is Kristyn Wong-Tam. I'm the Member of Provincial Parliament for Toronto Centre. Today I'm hosting this press event with my colleague and friend, MPP Chris Glover, who will be taking the floor very shortly. We have a number of MPPs who have all been instrumental in participating in the design of this press event. Each and every single one of them has been working diligently and hard in their communities to raise the concerns and to make sure that people in their communities understands the impacts of Bill 39, the government's so-called Better Municipal Governance Act. And I just want to recognize that the offices of those MPs are represented here. And I want to say thank you for their leading work and contributions to this discussion. That would include MPP Jessica Bell, University Rosedale, Marit Stiles from Davenport, Tom Rakosovic from Humber River Black Creek, Dolly Bengham from Scarborough Southwest, our interim leader of the NDP, Peter Tabbins from Toronto Danforth, Butila Carpoche from Parkdale High Park, and of course, Jill Andrews from Toronto St. Paul's, all extraordinary MPPs who have been working around the clock to make sure that the bills that are being introduced by the government can actually be understood by their communities, but also the fact that the communities have a chance to respond to it. So what we know about Bill 39, I'll just take a moment to say, is that Bill 39 was introduced less than 1 month after the municipal election. Voters of Toronto all went to the polls on October the 24th. It was a surprise bill that was tabled by the government, and one that was done without much consultation or any consultation. And I think the most jarring thing is that it was done without any disclosure. So having a full municipal campaign that lasts over 5 months long, and then having voters wake up the following day to new legislation that dramatically changes how decision-making is made in the cities, including the City of Toronto, is extremely alarming. Bill 39 is comprised of 3 schedules. Today, we are going to focus on the one schedule, Schedule 1, which amends the City of Toronto Act that gives the head of council, in this case, the mayor, the opportunity and the right, by enshrining it into legislation, the right to propose new bylaws that will go directly to City Council for a vote, and the right to then create a new bylaw with only 1/3 of the vote. So the speakers that are here today will certainly speak more to why that is challenging and of course undemocratic. But I think more importantly for us as Canadians, as Ontarians, as Torontonians, we will all recognize that this has never been done before in the history of our nation, province, and city. And I think it would be important for us to also recognize that any democratically elected institution and house around the world does not have these type of minority minority powers and rules. So this is really quite a lightning rod right into the heart of democracy. So I want to turn the floor over now to my colleague, Chris Glover, who is going to then introduce our speakers and add a few remarks himself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristyn. And I want to thank the Ontario NDP caucus for your support in helping us put this together. And I want to thank all the speakers who are here. Bill 39 is an egregious attack on our democratic rights. And yesterday in the House, I asked the Premier, why a third? Why should only a third make the decision? Why not a quarter? Why not a sixth or a tenth? And what we did is we looked at the endorsed candidates, and Mayor Tory and Doug Ford together have endorsed 9 of the elected the newly elected councillors. And so that means that's 1/3 plus one. So it really looks like Mayor Tory and Doug Ford made this secret deal during the election to overturn and override the will of the people who voted in our last municipal election. This is an egregious assault on our democratic rights. And it's not just this election. This is not about building housing. This is not just our votes. If we let this stand, it means that no election anywhere in this province, and no municipal election, will ever be safe. And it means that our children and our children's grandchildren's votes may not be respected. So I think it speaks to the importance of this issue that we've been able on such short notice to gather such an incredible group of speakers. And I'll just list them off now. And I want to thank all of you for being here. So in order of speaking, we've got former Mayor John Sewell, former Mayor Barbara Hall, Councillor Paula Fletcher, Councillor Josh Matlow, newly elected Councillor Jamaal Myers, and Mike Layton, former councillor. So each of you will be speaking, and we won't. If you could just start, the next speaker just start when the speaker before you finishes. So John, you're up first.
Thank you very much. One democratic principle is that citizens have the opportunity to express their opinions directly to legislators on proposed legislation. The government seems ready to throw that principle out the window, just as they severely limited those who could speak on Bill 23, the Strong Mayors Act. A second democratic principle is that decisions are made by the majority, decisions on who is permitted to hold office, and decisions about when a law is passed. Bill 39 throws that principle in the garbage bin as far as municipalities are concerned. And it's not just that Premier Ford does not prize democracy. It seems that conservatives in the legislature are ready to follow his lead. I asked a progressive developer to speak out on Bill 39, and to my great surprise, he said he agrees with the bill. The main reason seems to be that the ward system, he thinks, fosters NIMBYism so that not enough development gets approved by City Council. The RLB Construction Crane Index Report, and that's the best marker of major construction activity, states that in the first quarter of 2022, there were 252 building cranes in Toronto. The city with the second highest number of building cranes was Los Angeles with 51. Seattle had 37, Calgary 31, Washington 26. Toronto has led the crane index every year since 2015. So the argument that NIMBYism requires a majority of councillors to be overruled to encourage construction in Toronto is totally false. Even progressive developers are willing to abandon democracy to make more money. Shakespeare, as usual, puts it best. What fresh hell is this? I now pass it over to Barbara Hall.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. I've been watching around the world the decline in democracy. And it's not hard to see that happening, watching what's happening to the South, but also in many other countries, and a concern about the protection of democratic communities. And I must say, I've often done that from the perspective that democracy is quite safe here in Canada, in Ontario, in Toronto. Yes, we always need to be vigilant, but the major conditions for democratic governance are here. And in that light, I was shocked to see Bill 39 and the implications of it, not just now, but as a precedent in society and governance in Ontario, across the country, all of Canada. As has been said, this is the first time that majority decision-making has been attacked. And I believe that's very dangerous and needs to be stopped in its tracks. A real threat to democracy is the cynicism that citizens have of government, the cynicism that many young people have, and that is dangerous in its own way. And I believe that reducing the majority just feeds that cynicism. Another issue in Toronto that we have around democracy is the kind of representation that we have at council, whether it reflects the population of the city. And in the past municipal election, we were very lucky to have many new councillors coming from very diverse communities, helping to right that imbalance in the makeup of our council. But this bill and the reduction in the needed number of votes to pass bylaws, in a way, totally counters the positivity of the election. It's very possible that all decisions can be made without the voice of those councillors and the communities that they represent. So I believe that this bill, yes, it attacks the principles, but it also attacks the reality of democracy for many people. Just finally, thinking about this and my time on council, in a way, it's tempting to know that for the issues a particular mayor thinks are most important can be brought into reality through a reduced number of voters required. However, that means that would apply to all mayors, whatever their interests. It's a very slippery slope. It could result in very, very bad decisions contrary to the view of the vast majority of citizens in Toronto becoming a reality. It needs to be stopped. Thank you. Paula Fletcher is next.
Oh, Paula, you're me.
There we go. Thank you. Premier Doug Ford's government has threatened democracy before in Toronto in 2018 by cutting Toronto Council in half, and this summer by granting unnecessary new powers to our mayor. But with Bill 39, he is poised to do much worse than threaten our democracy. He is poised to upend it. If passed into law, Bill 39 would allow Toronto's mayor to approve bylaws with only the support of 8 councillors, just 1/3 of Toronto's elected council, and nowhere in the world is there a system of democratic government where such minority rule exists. And make no mistake, this is an attack on democracy. And it is only the latest, because when Premier Ford created 25 mega wards in the middle of the 2018 municipal elections, he made sure that Torontonians were the least represented municipal constituents in the province of Ontario. The strong mayor powers introduced this past summer would let Toronto's mayor veto council decisions that didn't align with Doug Ford's wishes, even if they did represent Torontonians' priorities. However, with the new powers to be granted under Bill 39, that veto won't even be necessary. Our mayor, with the support of just 8 allies, can make that law himself. Over the 25 years of the amalgamated city of Toronto, council has made many good decisions in opposition to the mayor of the day, and often done so with very close votes. A few examples. Council rejected plans to send garbage to the Adams Mine in Northern Ontario, said no to the creation of a waterfront casino, said no to the privatization of Toronto's water, preserved the Portland's flood protection plan, and saved 800 affordable city homes from a fire sale sell-off. We also prevented the closure of many library branches and long-term care and stopped the plans to sell our municipally owned zoos. If Bill 39 had been enacted then, Toronto would be a very, very different place today. And I'll pass this over to newly elected Councillor Jamaal Myers.
Thanks, Paula. Many people, including many residents in my beloved community of Scarborough North, are calling Bill 39 undemocratic because it essentially turns Toronto's duly elected council into an advisory group and by extension, silences the voices of community members on issues and policies that will shape our city for generations to come. It's disappointing that the mayor requested this power while making no mention of it during the campaign. And it should be pointed out that his Ottawa counterpart has promised not to use these powers. So Toronto would be the only legislative body in Canada where decisions can be made by 1/3 of its elected members. Further, it is not lost on me or many of my colleagues that this move directly disempowers our newly elected members who come from many diverse backgrounds and represent the rich lived experiences that have often been absent at City Hall. Doug Ford ran for mayor of Toronto back in 2014, and Torontonians resoundingly said, no, thank you. There are more than enough issues that our premier should be focused on, including the unacceptable backlogs in our hospitals and the ongoing labor strife in our schools, both of which can be directly traced to the provincial government's lack of focus and preparedness. That so much time is spent dictating how Toronto runs its government really shows that the leadership of our province is not focused on the issues that really matter to people. If the province was really serious about getting and keeping people housed, they would bring back rent control, remove provisions in the proposed legislation known as Bill 23 that reduces the affordability period for newly built affordable units from 99 years to 25 and provide funding to Toronto to cover the ongoing operation and maintenance of Toronto Community Housing and Toronto's shelter program. If they did all that, we would actually be able to get housing, particularly affordable housing built. And just to end on this point, democracy works. Rooming houses are often pointed to as an example of an issue where the mayor would need these powers. However, of the 7 newly elected Toronto councillors, all of us support legalizing and regulating rooming houses, and 3 of us have replaced councillors that were opposed to legalizing them. So let's trust the voters and decide what kind of city we want, and more importantly, who we're building it for. Now I will pass it on to Mike Layton.
I think another current city councillor is going to speak in the meantime. Councillor Matlow.
Thank you, Mike. During the municipal election, John Tory, without revealing it to the public, nor with any consultation with his colleagues, who have also been duly elected together to represent the people of Toronto, requested that Doug Ford provide him powers that are unprecedented in any democracy anywhere in the world: minority rule. Bill 3, the predecessor of Bill 39, while I didn't agree with it, as many didn't, at least was a reasonable debate amongst reasonable people who believe in democracy. There is precedent for stronger mayor powers throughout the United States and around the world. And one can be on either side of that debate and still believe in the principle and the tenets of democracy. But minority rule is the antithesis of democracy. John Tory should have known better, and Doug Ford should have not been providing him that request. As many of my colleagues today said very, very clearly, this is not about housing and it's not about transit. Doug Ford has the power himself to address the housing crisis if he chose to, rather than simply defer or neglect to provide that leadership. In other words, the root of all planning in Toronto comes from provincial legislation. John Tory could be doing more about transit. Smart Track was never a real thing. So in other words, if John Tory, who wins over 90% of the votes at council, chose to provide the leadership, he could. There is no reason for this new power, and it's wrong. I want to thank the Ontario NDP, our official opposition, for your leadership and your principled stand for defending our local democracy. And I want to thank the 5 mayors who have taken a stand and also requested John Tory rescind his request of Doug Ford. This is one of the most important questions that everyone needs to answer today. Are we going to buy into the rhetoric of getting results, getting things done through any means necessary? Or are we going to agree that any decision made, whether one agrees with it or not, should be made through a democratic process? And that's the question that we need to answer today. And I'm glad that the NDP are posing the question to the government. Thank you. Oh,
Well,
I'm sorry, and I apologize. And now I would like to pass it on to my sadly former colleague, my wonderful former colleague, Mike Layton.
Well, thank you very much, councillors. And this is a tough panel to close off, but I'm going to do my best just to recap some of the points that I think were made. First of all, like there are other outstanding issues with this bill, as I'm sure many who are listening have concerns about. One is that it puts municipalities at a worse space as it relates to their budgets. 2, it does irreparable damage to our natural environment that could result in greater flood costs and damage in the future. And finally, it gives us absolutely no hope of achieving our net zero targets as cities and as a province because of the result of some of the other changes. But the points that I think we've heard loud and clear today is from former mayors saying this is unprecedented power that you are centralizing in the mayor's office. Heard from several past mayors, they don't need to get the job done. Councillor Tory hasn't needed these powers to put forward, Mayor Tory hasn't needed to put forward these powers in order to advance his agenda on city council. He typically does so, including the support of a majority, if not unanimous support at council. We've heard from past councillors who have been through these fights with mayors who have stopped things like sending our garbage to the Adams mine, like a downtown casino, inappropriate actions by public officials. We've heard from new councillors that are saying we want to work with the mayor to advance the perhaps one item from the past term of council that is used as a rationale for advancing this such powers to the mayor. And let me focus on that point for a second, because it's brought up quite regularly that the rooming house vote could have gone any different. Think about this for a second. 3 appointed deputy mayors of 4 of Mayor Tory's were opposed to advancing the rooming house bylaw. Now, I gotta say, like, don't let me tell you how to interpret that, but would the mayor turn his back on 3 of the 4 closest allies on council in order to advance this? I can't imagine that he would. Now, I also don't imagine that Mayor Tory will in fact abuse these powers to any great deal. I don't believe that. However, the precedent that this sets in the future, and if we look at not in the not so distant past, how it could have gone terribly wrong, in the future, this could go very, very wrong. This is a solution in search of a problem. If the premier and mayor really wanted to advance housing solutions faster, because there has been no delays once a staff report hits council. There are very, very few delays that are a result of the council's decision. Typically, they involve the heavy hand of the province or provincial planning rules, like the need for us to request municipal zoning orders, like the appeals process. All of this is what is actually getting in the way of us getting approvals and getting shovels in the ground. It has nothing to do with the will of council or the will of the mayor being overturned by the will of council. And so for all of those reasons, as you've heard, this is clearly something that Mayor Tory needs to push back on and in order for the Premier to step away from, in order for us to continue to have the wonderful democratic process that we have, as complicated and messy as it sometimes may be.
Thank you very much to all our speakers. You've all been so elegant and passionate in your remarks. I know that there's much more to be said, and there's a chance now for you to take some questions from members of the media. To all the media who are in attendance today, we would love to hear from you. If you can let us know your name, the media outlet that you're reporting on behalf of, and the question that you have, if you can direct it to a particular speaker that you want that question answered, that will also be very helpful. I'm going to now turn the floor over to Benjamin from my office, who's going to help us moderate this portion.
Hi, we have Alan S. Howe raised their hand first. We're asking you to unmute, Alan.
I would like to ask any of the sitting Toronto councillors this question. So are you planning on taking any action in council to pressure Tory to pull back on these powers, or to or how is this going to change what happens in the council chamber this session?
I'll start off on that as Councillor Fletcher. And I'm hoping that in today's council meeting, which is a special called council meeting to deal with only Bill 23, another bill being brought in by the Ford government, and the appointments to various committees, that we can find a way to discuss Bill 39 this afternoon as well. And I would be supportive of that. It's not on the agenda, but it could be discussed.
I'll offer just what I know. So I discussed it with the clerk, and it was the mayor's prerogative as to what he wanted to put on this first council agenda of the term. He selected to, and rightfully so, put Bill 23 on it. He also intentionally decided to omit Bill 39, so it won't be on today's agenda. Like Paula, like Councillor Fletcher, if there is a way to maybe refer to the item perhaps while we're discussing Bill 23, many of us will. And certainly there are many of us who will also be conveying the views through other points in the meeting of our constituents. Through questions that I posed to the mayor yesterday, he did say that he will be, that Bill 39 will be on the December council agenda. So the councillors who you see here today, along with many of our colleagues, we have work to do together to prepare for that meeting and to mount a challenge. And we will work together on escalating this, frankly, as far as we need to challenge this, because as Councillor Layton said, this is not about even John Tory. And even if he says, trust me and don't worry, I'll only use it in certain contexts or what have you, the legislation doesn't say that. So it's not about John Tory. It's about the role of mayor and the tenets of our democracy. And we have a job to defend that as the official opposition is at Queen's Park.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I was also hoping to ask, we saw Queen's Park today saw a survey from Nick Kouvelis's firm, which is the internal pollster for the PC's campaign research. They were feeling out the possibility of creating a NFL stadium in Toronto. This was months ago. I haven't heard anything about it since, but we're wondering if these powers that he's working with Tory on could be like a prelude to some big announcement like an NFL stadium that might be controversial. Do you see something like that happening? Because they can just add whatever priorities they want to this bill.
It's Kristyn Wong-Tam speaking, and thank you, Alan, for the question. I can only speak for myself, and I will invite my colleagues, the MPPs, to hop into that question if they like. But I think what we can rightfully expect, and it's based on historical patterns, is that when people work in partnership and in secrecy, you can anticipate that more bad things are going to come. And so it's not the first time that we've seen, in this case, then Councillor Ford tried to advance a Ferris wheel, a mega mall on the waterfront, a downtown casino. If he had the partnership and the power at that time at City Council, he certainly would have rammed it through. So it wouldn't necessarily be out of the ordinary for the two, I would say, and out of the realm of possibility and imagination of these two folks, that something like that is entirely possible, simply because we also have no idea what the provincial priorities are, considering the fact that this provincial government, the Ford government, has spent 3.5 years hiding their mandate letters from the people of Ontario. So it is important for us to recognize that Mayor Tory has described these powers as proactive veto powers, but what we know is that that's not what it is at all. It is powers that allow him to initiate legislation, new bylaws, without consultation with the public, without consultation with his colleagues on council, and he has to do the bidding of the government of the day. In this case, largely strongly controlled by Premier Ford. I want to just recognize that there might be other MPs who would like to speak to this question, or perhaps other questions from the media. I want to also make sure that we have opportunities to acknowledge Jessica Bell, who's going to take an opportunity to say a word or two. We do have another question I see from Jeff Gray. Jeff, I know that you can't raise your hand, but if you want to unmute yourself, we'll take your question now.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, now we can.
Oh, great. Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I don't know if John or if any of you could field this, but you were talking about obviously debating this on council, but is there no legal recourse? Is anyone looking at any possible, is there any possible court challenge at all that could be launched against this, sort of on some of the sort of fuzzier things in the Constitution or democratic process, this kind of thing?
Well, I think part of the problem is that the Supreme Court has said that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms doesn't apply to municipalities, which is a bit odd. But there might be some other court challenge. Obviously, there is the idea that the federal government could disallow this legislation. I mean, we must say that this is an absolutely extraordinary thing. And I think it's a good opportunity for the federal government to say, hey, we believe in democracy. So disallowance is I think a possibility if Bill 39 gets approved as everybody expects it will.
And just as a follow-up to that, is it possible that councils could, if they saw one of these 1/3 votes coming, just shut it down and deny quorum and just shut the thing down to block it? Is that a realistic possibility, or is there some sort of safety valve on that?
I don't think that is, in my opinion, that's not clear at the moment. I certainly would hope that, in fact, the majority of council would walk out, so their council would be unable to act. But I'm not clear as to whether or not the mayor can just privately with his 7 councillors saying, hey, I did it. It sounds as though he can, but don't know.
It's Councillor Fletcher. I think the procedural bylaws of the city would certainly have to be rewritten because none of these things are actually there in the city's procedural bylaws. And that will be another focus of discussion, I'm sure, and would have to come to council unless the 9, and that means what is quorum when you're using the 8+1, the minority rule clause.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for your question and for all of you for your answers. I believe there may be no more questions from the media. I want to acknowledge Progress Toronto, who's taken some time to join us today. They are represented here by Sam Tabasinajad. And of course, Progress Toronto, I know, has been very busy organizing and promoting Bill 39, or explaining it or unpacking it to the citizens of Toronto. City Council is meeting for the very first time today on official business at 12 o'clock this afternoon, and Progress Toronto is inviting all citizens, all residents of Toronto to their House of Government to watch the proceedings. I'm sure the mayor, city clerk, and all the councillors would be welcoming you to your democratic house. I want to just begin I just got the notification that we have another question. Sorry, I was going to begin wrap up, but hang on tight. We've got a question from Aiden Chamandi. Aiden, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I could not figure out how to raise my hand. But thank you for taking my question. So obviously a lot is made of Toronto's I would actually, if every elected official could address this quickly, that'd be great. I understand if there's not time. But obviously a lot is made of Toronto's very restrictive zoning rules. One of the biggest things from the Housing Affordability Task Force was, as of right, 4 stories. I'm just wondering if mainly the Toronto City Councillors here all support that. If not, why? And if so, what you would do to kind of advance that measure this term.
I'd be happy to begin. So the irony is that there's already movement on that at council. There's actually a report coming forward. The acronym is EON, Enhanced Housing Opportunities in Neighborhoods. And that, along with other opportunities for plexes and a variety of different options for people who may not be at the poverty line or the wealthiest of our society, but people who simply cannot get a start in this market at any price point. There should be and there will be more opportunities for that. The irony is, though, that this has support on council. It's evident that the majority of councillors support this. And moreover, if Doug Ford really wanted to, he could just change the zoning himself. So in other words, Doug Ford is choosing not to take responsibility. He's creating red herrings and gaslighting people with strong mayor powers that were unnecessary. And I just don't think you're gonna see a lot of opposition at council. I'll hand it over to my colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you, Aidan, for that question, because as Councillor Matlow's pointed out, the provincial government does have an MZO power, municipal zoning order, and they've used it in many, many places. If this was the key reason to overthrow majority rule in Toronto and impose a minority rule, the government could simply do an MZO in all those neighborhoods that don't perhaps at this point enjoy the as of right 4 stories. Throughout many neighborhoods in Toronto, that there are many 4-story buildings nested in residential neighborhoods. So this is a really important notion that there is no real reason for the Ford government to give our mayor these powers when actually, as is pointed out, the provincial government has all of the planning powers in the city of Toronto and oversee them all. The Ontario Land Tribunal makes all of those decisions. And I think, as former Mayor Sewell pointed out, there are 252 cranes in our city, frustrating many people when they're trying to move around, whether it's road construction or residential construction, commercial construction, and that we're already very well able to build as much as the market will bear, right now. So those are arguments that simply don't hold any water, Adrian.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. I just want to echo what my colleagues, Councillor Matlow and Councillor Fletcher just said. And I'd just like to add, I ran specifically on allowing upzoning in single-family home neighborhoods, specifically to help with the affordability crisis. And it's important that, there is opposition to upzoning in these neighborhoods, but it's important that if people are going to accept the outcome, there has to be a process that everybody respects. And so the process really matters. And the process, as far as most people understand it, is majority rule. We have to get to a place where enough councillors are comfortable that with whatever legislation we're putting forward is going to be acceptable to the most number of people and actually deal with the problems that we face.
Thank you so much, Jamaal, Paula, and Josh, councillors. for your answers. I believe we're now definitely heading into the wrap-up stage. I want to thank everyone for your time, your participation in this call to the Ontario NDP official opposition. It's been a privilege working with all of you. I want to end my remarks and hand it over to Jessica Bell with actually a quote from David Miller, if I may, just because he wasn't able to join us. David Miller, former mayor of the City of Toronto, has this to say: I had the privilege of serving the people of Toronto for 16 years as an elected official, the last 7 as the second mayor of the amalgamated city. Never in my wildest nightmares did it occur to me that such an undemocratic legislation would be proposed, let alone requested and negotiated in secret by the sitting mayor of Toronto. Minority rule is wrong, period, and must be stopped. I want to acknowledge Jessica Bell, our housing critic, to close us off and to tell us about the next step opportunities for public deputation at the province, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much, everyone.
I love this event. I was so inspired hearing all of you speak. There are 83 Conservative MPPs and there are 15 million Ontarians. They have raw political power. We have the people power. And people power always prevails provided we use it. I am requesting that you sign up to speak to Bill 39 in committee at Queen's Park. You can do that to the Legislative Assembly of Ontario website. I encourage you to come down to City Hall today at 12 p.m. to send a message to Mayor Tory that he should never, ever pass a bill with just 1/3 of City Council votes. It took us thousands of years to secure representative democracy in cities, states, and countries. It wasn't given to us. Our ancestors worked for it. Torontonians and Ontarians, it is time for us to work together to defend and strengthen our democracy again.
Thank you. And Chris Glover, the last final word to you.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for being here. And I want to echo Jessica's call. Please take action on this. Please, sign up. Look on the Ontario website, the Ontario Legislature website. If you can't find out how to depute to Bill 39, reach out to one of our offices, one of the Ontario NDP offices. We will help. We will show you how to do it. Come down to City Hall today at noon. We need to show strength, and we need to show that the people of Toronto who just voted in our election, demand that our votes be respected, that minority rule can never stand. Minority rule can never stand in the City of Toronto or anywhere in this province or in this country. And so we've got to show that strength. So I invite people to come down. And thank you everybody for coming out today, to all the speakers and all the viewers. Thank you for being here.